So, welcome to Beauty of Colors podcast, Janet. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm very excited to talk with you.
Okay, so tell the listeners about you and how did you learn to deal with it?
So, I'm a 52-year-old mom with 4 kids, and I didn't learn how to deal with it until I was about 50 years old. I went through life just pushing through, thinking that I was resilient because I could take anything that was thrown at me, plow through it, and be completely fine and get to the other side. Until at 49, I broke. And I didn't realize that I should have been dealing with all of that stuff for decades. I just thought, if you can get through it, you're fine. And that's really not the case. And so the way that I learned to deal with it is after I actually broke, I went on this deep dive of research, and I actually went back to school and got my master's in organizational psychology. And through those two things, I ended up learning about the concept of really connecting your emotions with your physical body, that you can't just feel your emotions inside you, that you need to be able to express them. And when I tell people about this, they're kind of like, I don't really get this. And so I say, well, think about when you're happy. What do? You laugh, you smile. That's a physical expression of the emotion. If you're excited, you might jump up and throw your hands in the air and yell and, show that physical emotion and energy around some particular emotion. And when we're sad, we might cry. But then I ask people, well, how do you physically express your anger? And I know for me, I had no idea how you could actually physically express your anger, and certainly not a way to do it safely, both for me and for everyone around me, because you can't just lash out and start hitting things or throwing things or doing whatever comes to mind to release your anger. So I had to learn, what does that actually mean? And does it actually work? And all of my research and my education had its origin in the book, The Body Keeps the Score, that was written by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. And he did a lot of research around PTSD and veterans. And if you think about the military, or anyone that's in a life-threatening situation, they really can't react. They have to stay really controlled, both physically and mentally. They have to be, very present, very aware, and not let their body react. But what he found is those people really trapped their emotions inside their body, and they really trapped them physically. And if he was able to allow them to somehow think or experience internally and mentally whatever that stress was that they went through that started the PTSD, and to do it in a safe place, and then somehow physically express it. Maybe it's punching a pillow, maybe it's boxing, maybe it's jogging, maybe it's just doing something physical for them. But it was while they were thinking of that emotion and they could release it, they could just kind of like shake it out, if you want to go with the Taylor Swift song. It's just some way to get that physical embodiment of that emotional feeling. And when they did, they were able to reduce the amount that they were triggered by PTSD dramatically. It doesn't go away. It's not like all of a sudden you're miraculously nothing bothers you, but it really did help them release that. And so I looked at it and thought, what about for me? I'm an everyday person, but I have anger. I had a lot of anger that I never did anything with. Like, could I actually do something similar? I wasn't in a war. I wasn't, I didn't have a lot of those tragedies happen to me, but I had gone through some things that were emotionally traumatic, and I had never dealt with them. And so I did. I learned that my way of being able to deal with it was to learn how to connect that mental and physical connection, that highway between those two, and actually let that information flow out of me. And it released the hold that it had on my mind. and it really allowed me to truly become resilient, because now when something comes at me, I have a lot more capacity because I'm not still carrying all of that weight from decades. I'm able to take it on, deal with it. And then when it's appropriate, if it's something that made me sad or angry or some negative emotion, then I can physically express it, but to do it in a safe way.
Okay. So you said you started this journey at 49?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So why do you hate the phrase, just let that stuff go, or just let that shit go?
So I hate that phrase because I don't think you can just let it go, just miraculously walk away from something. I think if something bothers you a lot, that you need to actually deal with it. And I've had a lot of people say to me, well, it's not that bad, just get over it. And I'm like, no, I actually can't. I'm sorry. Maybe you can, and that's great, but I can't. And I've talked to a lot of people that they're like, yeah, I really can't either, but I never really knew how to deal with it. And so it just makes me really upset when people say, you shouldn't have to deal with it. You should be, mentally strong so you can just power through. Like, no, we should not encourage people to be just, power through and consider that resilience. It's not advancing through adversity. It is actually learning from it, dealing with it, recovering from the adversity, and then moving on. And then you can let it go, but it takes those steps beforehand in order to do it. I don't want people to think that they should be able to go through life and just let everything go and nothing should bother them, because that's not reality.
That is true. Um, when you do let it go, what happened? How did you feel when you let that go?
So when I was going through this, I'll take a little bit of a step back. So the thing that ended up breaking me was I found out that my husband was having an affair and wanted a divorce. And I crumbled. I could not eat, I could not sleep. I lost almost 40 pounds in less than 3 months. I was a skeleton, and I had 4 kids, and I had to function. I had to get through. And I'd had a lot of things happen in my life prior to that. I was a very successful person. I had traveled and lived all over the world. I had given speeches to Fortune 500 companies. I had worked with CEOs of some of the largest companies in the world. And I couldn't understand why this particular thing broke me. It was hard, absolutely. But why did it break me that much? And that's when I started that research and everything. And as I was getting to my recovery process, I went on some medication, and then I got a therapist. And as I was doing the research, I uncovered that concept of the physical connection, and I wanted to explore it more, but I didn't know how. And when I talked with my therapist about it, she really hadn't had any experience with that particular concept. And in a very random conversation, I talked to someone who had a friend who was at one point in time a social worker and had switched to become a personal trainer. And she said, I think you might be able to work with her and come up with some sort of a program. I was like, okay, I'll call her and see if she's willing to do this weird concept with me, because nobody that I know has ever done something like this. And so I called her and I told her what I was thinking of. And she said, okay, I'll work with you. Let's set aside 30 minutes. I'm going to come over. You're going to tell me about something that is causing like a negative emotion in you. And we're going to do some physical activity, and let's just see what happens. So she came over and she brought a whole bunch of different things. But in this particular instance, she brought boxing gloves and then the mitts that another person holds and a person hits them so that you're safe and not hurting the person's hands. And she had me put on the boxing gloves, and I started kind of warming up, jogging in place. You can think of Rocky Balboa getting ready to go in the ring. I'm certainly not that good, but I like to think, maybe. And she had me start lightly hitting her hands. And I started telling my story as I was doing this warm up. And then I got to a point in the story where I was really activating the anger that I felt. And she started having me increase the intensity of the punches that I was throwing. And then she found a phrase that encapsulated what I was feeling in that particular moment. And I'll make it PG. It was like, you darn jerk. And I would take that and I would yell it and I would hit the hand and I would punch and keep screaming it and yelling it. And it only took a couple of minutes. And I ended up in tears on the floor, so completely spent that I have never felt that much release in my body from a physical energy. And I work out a lot. It wasn't that I wasn't used to being in shape in that particular point in time. I wasn't very healthy because I had lost so much weight, but I was exhausted after about 10 or 12 minutes of going through this with her, and tears were streaming down my face. And she gave me a big hug and she left. And the first time I did it, I'm like, did this actually work? And I went back and I thought about the event that I had told her about, and it didn't trigger me like it did. I still felt some anger, but it wasn't the absolute rage that would build up inside me when I would think about it before. And so I kept doing it, and I picked a whole bunch of different events and we went through all of them and I expressed it. And your question, like, how do I feel? I feel lighter. After I get done with it, it's exhausting, but I feel light and I feel so energized
Mhm.
from a mental perspective. And I had never felt that energy and lightness before, ever. And so it really made me want to go through and do that for a large number of events. But I also was thinking, if this worked so well for my anger, what about sadness? Because I had learned for so long to suppress my emotions and my reactions and not show, be tough. If you get upset at work, you certainly can't cry in front of your boss. And so I learned to suppress that. And I was like, well, let me try it for sadness. And that one I did a little bit differently. I ended up by myself in my car. I had dropped off a couple of my kids for basketball practice. I got back in my car. I went to a dark corner of a parking lot and I had something written out and I read it, and I had the ugliest ugly cry you can possibly imagine. I had snot running down my face. I had tears. I turned all shades of red. It was ugly. But the same thing happened where when I was done and I really actually cried, I felt light. And I will say sadness was harder to feel like it was truly out of my body than the anger. The anger seemed to come out a little bit more rapidly, but it was still the same outcome. So that's how I know that I've actually worked through and dealt with something, is when I have that lightness and that energy inside me that is not a physical energy. It's just this emotional energy that I had never felt before.
So every time you do those episodes, like the one with anger and sadness, did you feel like a new person? Did you feel like the old person was gone and this was a new person every time you did an exercise like that?
I've never thought of it that way, but I will say that after I did the majority of the work, I did start to feel like a new person. So I wouldn't say each episode made me feel like a new person, but when I look back at the culmination of what that work did after about a year, I was a completely different person than what I was before then. Somebody asked me, um, would your 8-year-old, what would your 8-year-old self think about what you're doing now? And I said, my 8-year-old self would be shocked at what I am doing now. I'm an introvert by nature, but I'm an extroverted introvert in that I can go and talk to people, but it depletes me. So I have to recharge by myself. But at that age, at 8, I was so shy and so nervous about talking to anybody or being in front of anybody. And now, after having gone through this, I do feel like I have transformed into somebody that has found such a passion for wanting to help others feel as good as I have now felt, that I am willing to overcome that introverted personality and say, I want to go out and share. I want to have these conversations like I'm having with you. It might be uncomfortable for me, but my passion and my excitement around wanting to get this message out is so great that I couldn't not do it.
Okay. So what do you mean by most of us are just going through the motions of life?
So, what I have found as I've done this is that most people haven't gone through and really let those emotions go. They are still carrying them in a backpack, an emotional backpack, if you will, and they keep layering it on. And if you think about going on a hike, if you don't have anything on your back, you can experience and enjoy everything that's going around you, because you aren't distracted by having to carry something or deal with something or, be pulled this and that way. You can just simply be present. And I think the same is true in life, where if you keep layering those things on, your focus goes down and inward into what is on your back, what is taking up your mind space, not about everything that is going on around you. And that is when you're just going through the motions. You're showing up, but you're not really present. And there's actually a word for that. It's called presenteeism. And presenteeism was originally described or created for people at work, where you probably should take a mental health day, but you don't because you don't want to use up your sick days. And you can fake it enough to get by. So you're present, but you're not really there. Your body is, but your mind isn't. And I know now I ended up doing a lot of life that way. I would go to my kids' events and I would have so many things going around in my head. I would be thinking about an email I should send. I am thinking about, oh, whoops, I hit reply all. I probably shouldn't have hit reply all and complained about so and so. Or, I didn't do everything that I needed to do. And I'm still dwelling on all of these things that happened and that are out there, rather than sitting there engaged and watching my kid do whatever event that they're doing. And I look back and think about all of the memories I actually missed creating because I wasn't actually present. And so many people that I talk to are like, oh my gosh, yes, that is me. Even if you're on a call with somebody and your mind is wandering and going somewhere else because something happened and you're distracted by it, your mind is so overwhelmed by all of that stuff and the fact that you're still carrying all of this baggage from before, that you can't just simply engage with what's in front of you. Now, I'm not saying I'm perfect at that in any way, shape, or form, because I'm not, but I am so much better than what I was. And I am so much more engaged in my kids' lives, in my friends' lives, in my own life, that I feel like I see so many things that I just wouldn't have even noticed happening. I had a great conversation with a friend at lunch today, and she was telling me about some of the challenges that she was going through. And my initial reaction was to be like, okay, let's problem solve. And then I was like, you know what? She probably doesn't need that. She needs me to just listen. And so I sat there for an hour and a half and just really intently and purposefully listened to her. And when we got done, she was like, oh my gosh, Janet, I have to tell you, and I wrote a book about this. She's like, I have to tell you, your book is like a roadmap. And it was completely unprompted. And then she started talking about what I had done for her that day. And she was like, I want to be able to do that for other people. And I'm like, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is why I'm so absurdly passionate about it, why I get so excited that I bounce in my chair. I I really want people to understand this concept that you can do some things that are not necessarily what people think of when they think of how do you take care of your mental health. And you can do it yourself. You don't have to hire somebody to do this. And I want to share that with as many people as possible.
Wow. So what was the driving force of you writing your book, Janet?
Well, I mentioned I went back to graduate school. And so I was getting divorced. I had been a stay-at-home mom for a few years, and I was realizing I was going to go back into the workforce, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I think back, so many times people said to me, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life.
It's true.
And I worked every day of my life until that point in time. And I thought, I don't want to keep doing that. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I hired a executive coach to actually, I didn't even hire her. She gave me a free 2-hour session. And I was like, all right, well, if you're giving it to me for free, sure, why not? And her name is Cameron Huban. I could not recommend her enough. She is phenomenal, but she did this 2-hour workshop with me. And when we got to the end of it, she said, I think you have a book in you. And my initial reaction was, no, I don't. God, no, I don't have a book in me. I had never wanted to be a writer. I never thought of being a writer. I'm an avid reader. I love reading, but I never thought writing was for me. But I also really didn't know where I wanted to go. And so after that session, I was kind of mulling over some of the other things that she talked to me about. And I was like, you know what? I think I might have a book in me. And I found an editor and a publisher, and they did another free 30-minute book workshop with me and really showed me that, yeah, actually you do. And it was the way that I could get my message out to people and was a platform for me to share this research and the education that I had spent so many countless hours on to as many people as possible. And so I started writing the book, and it took me 4 weeks to write my book. I was shocked. I had no idea it would come out that fast, but when you do find what you love, it's really easy. And it is so enjoyable. I couldn't wait to sit down and write. And it just kept coming out. And it took a long time after that to edit it and get it ready to be published. But that initial outpouring came out so fast. It was really inspiring for myself. And it also showed me that, you know what, you're actually on the right path. And so I wrote that, and it came out on February 15th, which is, just a couple of weeks ago. And now I am doing as many podcasts and speaking engagements and workshops with people to help just get more awareness around what this concept is of being proactive with your mental health and to not go through life just dialing it in, going through the motions, not being really present. It's not worth it. And regardless of what type of trauma you had, even if it's little, you still are carrying that around and you still need to deal with it.
Okay. So Janet, what's the name of the book? We've been talking about the book, but what's the name of your book?
So the name of my book is Stop the Break. And the break is a mental health break that I want us to be able to stop the break and move from just surviving in life to thriving and catching fire. And the catching fire phrase came about in kind of a funny way, because as I ended up working with Cameron much longer than that free 2-hour workshop because she was so amazing. And she told me that as I was going back into the workforce, that I needed to update my LinkedIn profile. I was like, okay, well, how do I do that? And she said, well, go out and Google strong or good LinkedIn profiles and get some inspiration from that. So I did. And the first one that came up was a woman who wrote, I caught fire coding.
Mm, mm,
And I was like, she caught fire? How did she catch fire? Did she go to the hospital? And why is she writing about this in her LinkedIn profile? I was literally
mhm,
so concerned for this poor woman, and how could she catch fire, and how do you catch fire coding? My mind was just almost exploding with confusion. And then I took a moment and realized clearly that is not what she meant, but you like figure out what this phrase means. And it means finding your passion. You find this idea, this concept, something that really resonates with you and lights a fire inside you that you can't put out. And that's the catching fire that I want people to do. And I think it's a lot easier to do when you don't have all of that weight in your emotional backpack, because you can take that off, let it go, and say, what is it that I can't stop talking about? What do I annoy everyone in the room talking about? Outside of my kids, for me, it's proactive mental health. And I was like, you know what? That's what I want to do. So my book became Stop the Break. Nobody else has to break. Moving from surviving in life to thriving and catching fire. And in the book, which if you're interested and would like more information, you can go to my website, which is stopthebreak.life.
mhm.
But in the book, I tell my story of how I ended up breaking and then how I recovered. And that's kind of the first third of the book. The middle third of the book is, okay, well, what's the process? If you want to do what I did, how do you do it? And I literally lay out step by step what you can do if you want to go through that. And then the last part of my book is actually talking to society about how can we do this on a larger scale? How can we help people that might not even realize that they need to do something? How can we help them find out and make a change in their life so that they don't end up breaking? Because right now, there's such a stigma around asking for any mental health help that people don't want to do it. I mean, it's been shown through a lot of research that if you show that you need mental health assistance for anything, anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, it doesn't matter what it is, anything that's related to your mental health, you will have a harder time getting a job. You will have a harder time being promoted, and you will have a harder time keeping a job, because the stigma around any mental health problem prevents you from being considered for those positions. And so people that have gone to receive mental health help have a much lower level of income than those who haven't, even though it's also been shown everybody has some sort of mental health need. We just have such a stigma around it that people don't want to ask for help. And most of our resources as a society are also focused on after you break. So once you break, you have to ask for help because something has happened, and you can go find resources, which is amazing. And we should absolutely have a lot of resources there. But because nobody will self-identify before that breaking point, we have very little resources in that proactive portion, the part before you actually break,
Mhm.
teaching people, helping them understand what they can do, giving them these toolkits so that they don't carry all of that emotional baggage around. And that's what the end of the book is about, is how can we actually make that happen?
So you're saying that breaking mental health before it kind of grows, like
Yes,
addressing it before. Okay, okay, I got you. So,
exactly.
okay. So where can the listeners, apart from your website, where can the listeners get a copy of your book?
So my book is available at any online retailer that sells books. Anywhere in the world, doesn't matter what country you're in, you can go to any website that sells books and look for Stop the Break by Janet Barrett, and it will pop up.
And so where can the listeners get in contact with you? Like if they need to talk with you, if they need some encouragement, how can they get in touch with you?
So if you go to the stopthebreak.life website, there's contact information there. You can follow me on Facebook or LinkedIn, and all of the links you can find through that website. There's also the ability for any of your listeners to go to my website, and if they register for updated information about the book, they can win a signed copy of the book. Every month in the year of 2023, I will be selecting 2 random people to receive a signed copy. I just actually sent out my signed copies for February today.
Mhm.
But you can sign up and register to win a signed copy of Stop the Break.
So do you have any last words for the listeners to help them grow and to help them, especially the people who are listening and who are battling with mental health? Do you have any last words for them on how to deal with it?
So the first thing that I want to say to all of your listeners, you are not alone. One of the things that tends to prevent people from thinking that they need mental health help is that somehow their problem is something no one else has, that their problem is unique to them. And in a way, it is, but it's also not. Someone has gone through what you've gone through before, and there are resources out there. Maybe it's me, maybe it's someone else, but you're not alone. And there's other people that you can talk to about it. Almost everyone that I know, until they were willing to be vulnerable and share their story, had the thought that they were the only one. One of my sons, when he was 9, came to me and said, "Mom, I think the world would be better off without me." And it was one of the biggest gut punches I've ever had, because as a parent, you just want to wrap your child in bubble wrap and be like, "No, no, no, you're amazing. You're perfect. The world would not be better off without you." Oh my gosh. But I also was like, you know what? Clearly something is going on, and I don't know what that is. And I am not equipped to figure this out. And so I was lucky enough, I found a mental health professional for him. And after a couple of weeks, he called me and said, "I think I know one of the reasons why your son said that." Like, okay, what is it? Because he has bad thoughts about other people. Like, "I don't like you. You're mean. I wish you would go away." My son had no idea that everyone has these thoughts. He thought he was alone, and because he was alone, he was a bad person, and the world would be better off without him. And I had the realization, I'm like, you know what? I would say to him, "No, everybody has these thoughts. But do they?" In my head, I was like, do they really? Does everybody really have these? And they do. Everybody does have these thoughts. And I never once thought to say to my kids, "You know what? You're not alone. Everybody has those thoughts. It's okay. It really is okay." What's not okay is acting on them.
Yeah.
You might think, "I hate my brother. I could kill him." You can't actually kill him. That's the bad thing. But having that thought is normal. It is natural. And that's what he needed to know. So I want all of your listeners to know you're not alone. Whatever you're thinking and feeling, it's not just you. And there is help. And if you need help, reach out to anyone, including me. You can go to my website, stopthebreak.life. If I'm not the right person for you, that's okay. I also list a whole bunch of resources out there, because one size doesn't fit all. Not one person has the answer for every single person out there. I want people to get help in any way. And just know, if you want to be vulnerable with me, it will never go anywhere else. I am a very safe space. I've had a lot of people talk to me. I've had a lot of people share their stories. I want to be there for you, and I want you to feel that lightness and that energy that I have felt, so that you can truly enjoy and thrive in life.